Pretty cool to have that read right there on site, although I did not think the guy in the video was all that handsome. Hey, welcome. My name is Brannen. I get the privilege of being one of the pastors here on staff. Really grateful that you're here today. We are taking a journey as a church through the Gospel of Matthew, one of 4 accounts of Jesus' life. And so if Jesus is the centerpiece of our faith, we must know about him. And we can learn in no greater way than to read one of the Gospels. And so we're going through the Gospel of Matthew. And at this point, we are at a really large turning point in the Gospel of Matthew. So before chapter 12, you have Jesus experiencing a lot of what we would deem as successful ministry. People are coming out by the droves. Thousands and thousands of people are coming out to visit him, to hear him teach, to have him heal. And then he gives this really great warning like, hey, I want my closest ones to come. And they come around, he goes, you're gonna be rejected, betrayed, and hated. And they're, of course, dumbfounded by this because they think he's coming to establish a political kingdom. And he tells them this, and they're like, what is going on? And this passage is the first time we have some real tension with Jesus and the religious elite. Of course, we know before this, they don't like each other a whole lot, but here is where we get to see really the first tension play itself out. Now, this is a wild passage. Jesus, his disciples, they eat some grain, he heals a man, and then people want to kill him. If you think about just the movement of this passage, you're like, this is a really wild movement. Why in the world would they want to kill him? So we're going to dive into why they actually wanted to kill him for something as simple as healing or something as simple as allowing his disciples to eat grain. Before we do that, I want you to picture this. I want you to picture that you are walking in downtown Lakeland right now. So you're walking and you've got some business to attend to at your bank. And so you're walking downtown and you enter into your bank and you hear a really great commotion. You hear some yelling, some screaming. You realize that there's some people there that have masks on and they're wielding guns. You see people being told to get down on the ground. The moment you enter, you're like, oh my gosh, what did I just enter into? You're immediately told to get to the ground. You see large sums of money being thrown into bags. And then you're seeing the robbers exit. Now, there seems to be one leader within this group. And on their way out, though he is partially masked, you get an opportunity to see his eyes. You kind of like lock eyes. Have you ever had one of those moments in your life where it almost feels like this moment, my brain took a picture and I remember it vividly. And so he's walking out, he looks at you, you look at him, and your eyes lock just for that moment. And though his face is partially covered, you're like, those eyes, I will not forget those eyes and the unique features around those eyes. So the cops come later on, you attempt to give some kind of description to the cops, like, hey, this is what I saw, this is what we experienced, but you're not a whole lot of help because all you saw was a pair of eyes. Couple weeks pass by and you're at a fundraising event. And this fundraising event is for kids in poverty. And you're sitting at one of the tables with friends and you guys are eating and you're hearing speakers come up and they're telling you about the vision of the organization. They tell you exactly how they're helping the kids. And then one speaker gets up and he looks oddly familiar to you. You're like, where do I know this person from? I know this person from somewhere. And your friend at the same table as you leans over and goes, hey, this man just gave a large, substantial gift to this organization. He really cares about helping kids. And you're like, wow. You look harder at him and you realize those are the same eyes that I saw in the bank. That's him. You lean over to your friend, your brain is just going a million miles a minute. You lean over to your friend and you're like, hey, how large was the gift that he gave? And the friend goes, it's the largest gift the organization has ever received. It's $150,000. $150,000 is what the authorities estimated was taken from the bank. And so again, your mind is just racing. You're like, whoa. This is the guy, and he stole all of this money, not for himself, but to give to kids in poverty. Kind of a modern day Robin Hood, if you will. And you're forced to face this conundrum. What in the world do I do here? Do I tell the authorities, I believe this is the man that did this? Now, you know, if you go to the authorities and you tell them that you believe this is the man that did this, here's what you know is going to happen. They're going to take this money from this organization and give it back to the bank. But you know he did it. And so the question to you and me is, what in the world would you do in that situation? Would you turn him in? Would you not turn him in? This is a morally complex scenario. And here's what I know about life in general. Life in general, we have morally complex scenarios all the time that we face. Life is not as black and white as many assume. Whenever we navigate life, we know that there's times where we are confronted with something that is difficult to digest, difficult to make the right decision, so you're unsure. This is one of those passages that's morally complex. And we're going to watch how Jesus handles a very difficult situation and what decisions does he make and how does he respond. Chapter 12, verse 1 and 2, this is what happens. At that time, Jesus went through the grain fields on the Sabbath. His disciples were hungry and they began to pluck heads of grain and to eat. But when the Pharisees saw it, they said to him, "Look, your disciples are doing what is not lawful to do on the Sabbath." So let me kind of provide some context here. The Sabbath is such an important moment and such an important description within this text. If you don't consider the Sabbath, then you won't understand the full context of this message. Now, we have kind of lost a sense of what the Sabbath is. Last fall, we went through an entire series. We spent 6 weeks talking about Sabbath, because we know that our culture has actually lost a sense of what it is. And here's how we defined it last fall. We said the Sabbath is a set-apart day. It's a unique day. It's different from all the other days to stop, which if you look at the root of Sabbath, the Hebrew word, it literally means stop. To stop, rest, delight, and worship. So some people, they may hear the idea of like Sabbath and you're like rest, and us Westerners, we're like, all right, we get to lay around in our PJs at the house and we're gonna binge on Netflix or on social media. That is not the heart of Sabbath. Yes, we stop working. Yes, we rest, but then we delight in the right things. We do worship. That may entail a Sunday afternoon nap. All right, there's many times that I enjoy a good Sunday afternoon nap. It may include that. It may include feasting with friends. It certainly includes gathering with the people of God to refocus and recharge. So the Sabbath is this really unique set-apart day. Now, for the ancient Israelites, they fully understood what the Sabbath meant. So in Jesus' day and context, the Sabbath was a day where there was absolutely no work that would be done. Absolutely no work. So it didn't matter if you got, we got an AC guy, by the way, trying to work on this heat that's in here. We're just trying to prep you for summer. It's going to be a really hot summer, so we thought we'd make it a little warmer in here. But we're calling him out on the Sabbath, how we celebrate it on a Sunday to come work. There was none of that in Jesus' day. You're just going to have to deal with no AC. They would prepare meals the day before so they had enough to eat the next day, so there was no cooking. They would attend a worship service. Even today, if you look at Orthodox Jews, they carry over this entire idea of Sabbath. Many Jews will not use electricity on the Sabbath. They celebrate it on Saturday. They'll use candles instead of electricity. Many of them will not open up the refrigerator. They will keep the refrigerator closed because they don't want to use the energy to open up the refrigerator or allow the energy and the coolness inside the refrigerator to escape. They have actually elevators, if you've ever been over there, they have elevators that are programmed to stop on every floor so that you don't have to use the energy to press your floor number. It's kind of like, you remember the elf? He's like, oh, pretty. And he literally clicks every single floor. That's how it is over there. So they take the idea of the Sabbath to the extreme. They want to honor the Sabbath. They want to keep the Sabbath. And of course, we've lost this. Now, there's even this book You may have never heard of this book. It's the Ha-la-ha. Everybody say that with me. Ha-la-ha. And basically what it is this Jewish book in which they've taken all the Old Testament commandments. So there's 613. They've condensed them and then they expound on them. So they give you examples. So when the Old Testament says don't work, it kind of leaves it generic. Don't work on the Sabbath. So they go, you know what we need to do? We need to add to this so it's very, very clear to you exactly what it means not to work. So within this book, this Jewish book, it's not a biblical book, it's an extra biblical book. They actually have 39 kinds of work you cannot do. That includes you can't pick up a pencil. You can't pick up a hammer. You can't pick up money. You can't do anything that would require you to exert any kind of energy. When it comes to traveling, so we are told in the Old Testament law, you're not supposed to travel. And so here's what they did. They said, all right, here's the modern day. You can't be on a skateboard. You can't bike. You can't walk in a straight line, for you ready for this? For 0.59 miles, or that's breaking the commandment. And so they take what is kind of generic in the Old Testament, not to work, not to travel, and they're like, all right, we need to make it really black and white. So if you travel in a straight line more than a little over a half a mile, you're breaking the law. So keep it under, a half a mile. They add law onto law. Now, when you read this passage and you read the Old Testament, you realize Jesus' disciples are actually not breaking any specific commandment in the Old Testament. None. You cannot find an Old Testament commandment that says you cannot pick grain and rub it together and eat it. There's nothing inside the Bible and the scripture that says you are not allowed to do that. Now, if you're a farmer and you did farming for a living, you're not supposed to go out and pluck grain and to do work. We absolutely know that. But these guys are not farmers. They're hungry. They're going through the grain fields and they eat a little bit. The Pharisees look at that and they go, wrong. And what you see rearing its ugly head is legalism. I want to define legalism so we understand what it is. Legalism is this. It's attempts to earn God's favor, acceptance, or approval. So the Pharisees were key on this, that I don't walk a number of steps, I don't travel, I don't do 39 different kinds of work, so that God, you will receive me. So that God, you will give me your favor, you will give me your blessing. You will see how morally upright I am, Lord, and you will gladly welcome me into your presence. That's legalism. I do, therefore I earn. And we know this when it comes to grace. When it comes to Jesus, there is no room for legalism in our faith. It's that Jesus did and I receive, not that I do and earn. I simply receive what Jesus has already done for me. God accepts me not because I'm good, but because Jesus is good. God welcomes me into his presence, not because I didn't take a certain number of steps on the Sabbath or I didn't work on the Sabbath. He receives me because of the work and perfection of Jesus and his sacrificial death on the cross for me. So legalism is do, earn. And of course, here's what we see. A key hallmark of legalism is this. Legalism always adds to the law. So it takes what is very clear in the Old Testament and it wants to make it really black and white. So, hey, don't work. All right, well, here's 39 ways you cannot work. You can't travel. Here's a number of steps that you can take, but don't take any more because that would be breaking the command. So legalism wants more control, more black and white clarity on exactly what I should and shouldn't do. Legalism is trying to earn something from God. So how does Jesus respond to this? And this is how we respond to morally complex situations. Ready for this? Verse 3. He, speaking of Jesus, said to them, have you not read what David did when he was hungry and those who were with him? How he entered the house of God and ate the bread of presence, which is not lawful for him to eat, nor for those who were with him, but only for the priests. Or have you not read in the law how on the Sabbath the priests in the temple profane the Sabbath and are guiltless. I tell you, something greater than the temple is here. And if you had known what it means, I desire mercy, not sacrifice, you would not have condemned the guiltless. For the Son of Man is the Lord of the Sabbath. So his response, they're like, you're breaking the law. His response is threefold. The first is he tells a story about David. He reminds them of this Old Testament story. It's found in 1 Samuel chapter 21. You can go read it on your own. David and his companions are being chased by this insecure king named Saul. He's trying to kill them. He's trying to kill David. And so they are literally running for their life. And back then, whenever you would travel, it's not like you had a Buc-ee's you could stop at. You didn't have fast food restaurants you could stop at. If you were on the roads, you better have brought some food with you or you're going hungry. So they had to scramble. They had to leave town. They didn't have time to prepare for this trip. And so they are famished and desperate. And they arrive at the tabernacle. And there's a priest on duty right there, Ahimelech. Ahimelech is on duty. And they come to him and they're like, we're starving. We're famished. We're desperate. Do you have any common bread? And Ahimelech goes, we don't have any common bread here. All we have is the bread of presence. What in the world is the bread of presence? So you have the tabernacle. This is where God uniquely manifests his spirit, his presence. It was kind of the focal point, the epicenter of their spiritual life. This is where God made himself known in a really unique way, was the tabernacle. So when you worship, when you sacrifice, you would go to the tabernacle. And inside the tabernacle, there's this holy place, and there's this gold, and you can see it up here, there's this gold table. And continually inside of this place, there would be 12 loaves of bread. This is the bread of presence. There'd be 6 loaves stacked on each other. And every Sabbath, they would make new loaves, and they'd place the new loaves there. The old loaves, the priests would eat. Now, only the priests were allowed to eat this. It's explicit in the Old Testament. Only priests can eat this bread inside the holy place. Regular folks, doesn't matter. You can't eat it. So Ahimelech hears David's plea for food. He's like, wait, all we have is this in the holy place. We don't even know if it's a Sabbath. We don't even know if they're like making and baking new bread, loaves. But we just know that that's all he has. And what does Ahimelech do? This is quite the conundrum here. He actually gives the bread to David and his companions, and they eat it. Now, whenever Jesus told the story, the Pharisees, again, they want everything black and white. They're like, we don't know what to do with this story. Because they did something that was not lawful. It was not okay. David and his companions were not priests. They should not be eating this food. And yet, Ahimelech, they're desperate and famished, he gives them this food. So they were needy. The Old Testament also talks about those that are hungry, those that are needy, we take care of them. So you see how you have two competing laws against each other? And Jesus is like, hey, you guys know this story. It's pretty morally complex. What's the right answer here? And of course, they're scratching their head because they don't know. What Jesus is going to get at is they are actually misinterpreting the entire Old Testament, not just laws on the Sabbath. They didn't rightly understand the entire Old Testament. He's going to continue on. He gives another example. So David and the priests, or David and his companions. Then he talks about the priests. And he goes, and you know the priests, that on the Sabbath they work and yet they're guiltless. So as I've already mentioned, the Old Testament is explicit that you and I aren't supposed to work on the Sabbath. To keep it holy, unique, like we shouldn't be engaging in standard Monday through Friday or Monday through Saturday affairs. It's a unique day. The Israelites held that uniquely. It shouldn't work. But priests are working on the Sabbath. They're baking bread, putting new loaves out. They're conducting services on the Sabbath. They prepared all week, and here they are. They're giving the message similar to that of pastoral staff. Like we've been preparing all week for this, from the set list to the message to reading to preparing for a barbecue fundraiser after this. I mean, we've been working all week, and this is a culmination of the work, so we're working. And he goes, wait, they're guiltless. Again, you get to see how complex it is. Wait, we're not supposed to work. But the priests are working on the Sabbath, but are guiltless. Again, legalism has no grid to rightly understand this. And then third, he just simply goes, and I'm the Lord of the Sabbath. Like, I created it. If you want the accurate interpretation, you want to rightly understand the Sabbath, you don't need to go to the halacha. You don't need to go to the Pharisees. I will give you directly the correct interpretation and understanding of the Sabbath. I'm Lord of it. So that's his appeal. And we're getting hints about how they misinterpret it. Because he goes, what does he desire? Mercy, not sacrifice. This is the second time this has occurred in the Gospel of Matthew, this statement. Second time that Jesus has had to explicitly say, I desire mercy, not sacrifice. There's one other scenario that we have here. Jesus isn't done teaching on the Sabbath, so that same day, verse 9, this is what happens. He went on from there and entered their synagogue. And a man was there with a withered hand. And they asked him, is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath? So that they might accuse him. So they're trying to trap Jesus here. They're like, all right, this guy's got a withered hand. Can you heal on the Sabbath? He said to them, which of you who has a sheep, if it falls into a pit on the Sabbath, will not take hold of it and lift it out? Of how much more value is a man than a sheep? So it is lawful to do good on the Sabbath. Then he said to the man, stretch out your hand. And the man stretched it out, and it was restored, healthy like the other. But the Pharisees went out and conspired against him how to destroy him. So the Pharisees had pretty robust conversations too about healing, doctoral services. Like, how do we take care of people who are hurting on the Sabbath? We're not supposed to work. So nurses, doctors, you better listen. What does that mean? So here's the conclusion they arrived at this time. They arrived at this conclusion. Okay, you can provide medical services only if life is threatened. So a man with a withered hand, is his life threatened? No, well, no. He's had a withered hand for a very, very long time. He's not going to die because of a withered hand. However, Jesus goes, all right, I'm going to teach you yet again. And what he does is he actually heals the man's hand. This goes against everything that they expected. This goes against everything that they have taught. And he asked this rhetorical question. He goes, all right, if you have an animal that falls into a pit, are you not going to go and help that animal out of the pit? Of course they would. It's a rhetorical question. Now, they may have helped that animal out of the pit for financial reasons because, again, animals in this day equaled money. Maybe they actually cared about the animal. They actually wanted to protect the animal. They wanted the animal out of the pit, so they would go and save the animal. He goes, human life is so much more valuable than animal life. And yet you guys are treating humans, those that bear the image of God, worse than animals. Essentially is what he's saying, comparing the two. He heals the man and the man is fine. Here's what we know. Legalism ignores the heart of the law. It always ignores the heart of the law. Chapter 22, so in 10 chapters, Jesus is having another conversation with the Pharisees, and they're trying to trap him yet again. They're always trying to trap him in his words. And they go, Jesus, there's a lawyer who would study the law thoroughly and thoroughly and thoroughly, know it backwards and forwards. He comes to Jesus and goes, Jesus, what is the greatest commandment? Now, this was difficult for two reasons. The first reason why this was a difficult question was just the sheer number of commandments. As I've already mentioned, there were 613 commandments. Which one's the most important? That's a tall order. And not just that, is there were differing views on what was the most important. And so they would separate out commandments like heavy and light commandments. And some thought the commandment of circumcision was the most important. Others thought maybe Sabbath was most important. And so what Jesus does is he actually says, all right, here's the most important. Here's the heartbeat of the law. Like, you want to understand the goal. You want to understand what's behind all of the commandments. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind. This was actually a prayer, a statement that Jews would make every single day, multiple times a day. So if you're a good Jew, you're like, yeah, we say that every day. But Jesus isn't done, right? They ask, hey, what's the greatest commandment? And Jesus says, all right, you say this every single day, love God with everything, love the Lord your God with everything, but I'm not done. It's actually twofold. Love your neighbor as yourself. That's the heartbeat of the law. That's the goal of the law. Legalism is the exact opposite. Legalism is like about you do and you earn something from God, and it doesn't matter who gets hurt in the process as long as you earn your favor from God. As long as you look morally astute, it doesn't matter who gets hurt, who falls by the wayside. He goes, you have missed the heartbeat of the law. The law points us to love. The law is subservient to love. What do I mean by that? The law is a means, not the end. So the law is a means to teach us how to love the Lord our God with all of our heart, soul, mind, and strength. The law is a means to teach us how to love each other well. That's the heartbeat of the law, and they'd completely missed this. Now, I want to be really clear because it'd be really easy to go like, oh, all right, so we can dismiss the law for love. I've got a few cultural comments to make on that. First is, go backwards in the Gospel of Matthew to Matthew chapter 5. He's teaching about the law, Jesus, and he goes, not a dot, not an iota will pass away from the law. He's like, I didn't come to abolish the law or get rid of it. So apparently Jesus has a very high view of the law. If you look at an iota, it's the smallest letter in the Hebrew alphabet. So he goes, not even the smallest letter of the law is going away. A dot was the small extensions that would distinguish different letters from each other. So not the smallest letter, not the smallest extension is going to pass away from the law. That's the view that he had of the law. Very, very high view of the law. But also, he understands that the heartbeat of the law is to love, to teach us how to love. And so we don't discard the law. That is not what Jesus is teaching here. But we understand the intent of the law. And we're not attempting to add to the law. So maybe to pull all of this together, how do you and I handle morally complex situations that we will be confronted with often within life because life is complex? Well, the first calling is to actually obey the law. Does the Bible specifically address an issue in it? Well, you and I are called to obedience, not to gain something or earn something from God. See, here's the beautiful thing about the law. The law exposes our sin, points us to Jesus, then leads us to holiness in that order. Pharisees want to reverse that. It's like, oh, it leads you to holiness, and then you're accepted by Jesus, right? You're cleaned up, and then you're good. No. The law reveals our sin, points us to Jesus, and then ultimately leads us to holiness. And so if you're a believer in Jesus, the call is that we would obey the commands of Jesus. Now, what if you have a David scenario? People are hungry, yet they're not supposed to eat this bread. Two competing laws. How do we handle that? Well, I would first encourage you, fulfill the highest moral obligation. Jesus said, I desire what? Mercy, not sacrifice. Does it mean that he doesn't require sacrifice at all? No. Look at the sacrificial system of the Old Testament. Look at the calling of Jesus. He goes, hey, at times the gospel will call you to leave everything behind to follow me. That's sacrifice, friends. And yet he somehow says mercy over sacrifice. Loving people is what the law has intended for us to do. Loving the Lord with everything we have. Now, here's a really important cultural comment, because when I say loving people, here's what I don't want you to hear. Loving people doesn't mean we affirm every desire and every decision of people. Culturally, we define love as this: if you affirm, if you celebrate, whatever I want to do, whatever I want to be, that is not what the Bible calls us to do. The Bible says sometimes we actually have to give love or give truth, but we blanket it in love. Sometimes we have to give people what is difficult to swallow, but we do it because we love them deeply. And so I would say this, our goal with obeying the law is to love God and love people, fulfill the highest moral obligation. Next, pray. Very, very important. Again, if you're facing a very complex situation, the Bible is very clear that if you lack wisdom, pray for it. God has all the resources when it comes to discernment and wisdom. And he goes, just ask of me, and like a good father, I give. And so sometimes we just need to be on our knees praying about, Lord, what would you have for me? And then last, seek godly counsel. The church is a gift, friends. If you don't have other brothers and sisters in the faith that would help you navigate difficult circumstances and situations, should I take this job or not? How do I handle this relationship issue? What do I do over here? If you don't have godly people to lean into, then you're missing the fullness and the gift of the church. Part of the fullness and the gift of the church is we have people to walk alongside. The Bible says the fool does what is right in his own eye, but the wise one seeks counsel. So let us not be fools, let us seek counsel. Now, here's what we know. All of us have failed to fully obey the law, but there is one who fulfilled it perfectly and completely. He understands the heart behind the law. He understands every single commandment of the law. And of course, that is Jesus, who perfectly and fully fulfilled the law in every instance. Where you and I have failed, he has not failed. He has completely obeyed the Father, submitted to the Father in every single way. And then the beautiful thing on the cross, he takes all of our imperfections, all of our failures, and he dies in our place so that you and I no longer need to live under the law or legalism. No, we're free from that because when we trust Jesus, we know that he's paid the price for our sins. So it's not that I do and I earn. I simply have faith, I receive, and he takes me in as his child because he's paid the price. And so we trust in that. Listen, if you have never trusted in Jesus, maybe you've been on a tightrope of legalism, I would encourage you today, come to faith in Jesus, receive him. We're gonna have a prayer team up here in a moment. We also, if you're like, hey, I instead of praying with somebody, I would just like to let you guys know I made a decision. Please let us know. You can see how to do that on the screen. Or maybe you wanna take the next step and be baptized. Some of you need to take that step and be baptized. You need to obey the Lord because he says, be baptized. And you need to obey him in that. Well, that would be a beautiful step for some of you. And then finally, we celebrate with communion, friends. And so if you are a follower of Jesus,